My sister slid the bread basket toward my son and said, "We didn't order anything for him." Her voice was flat, almost gentle, as if belittling my child was part of the dining experience. My dad let out a small laugh. "You should have brought him something from home." Their kids were devouring $100 steaks, while mine sat quietly, staring at a pile of cold dinner rolls like it was all he was allowed to have. I smiled, breathed in once, and said a single word. "Noted." Every fork at that table paused midair. They thought that was the end of the conversation. They didn't realize it was only the beginning, because everything that happened after that dinner didn't just shift the balance, it tore open a truth we'd all been stepping around for years. Before I tell you how the night spiraled, tell me where you're listening from. It makes me feel less alone to know someone, somewhere, understands what it's like to finally draw a line with the people who raised you. When people ask me what my family is like, I always say, complicated. It saves me from explaining the unspoken ranking system I grew up under, where my parents handled my sister Tessa like delicate porcelain and treated me like reinforced cement, steady, unbreakable, built to carry weight nobody else wanted. I was the dependable one, the fixer, the child they didn't have to worry about. Tessa was the one who needed buffer, who needed excuses, who got rescued even when she caused the fire herself. When we were young, I used to hear my mother say, "Aubrey's strong. She doesn't need the same kind of love." I laughed about it then, thinking strength was admirable. But strength comes with a hidden cost. When you finally reach your limit, nobody believes it. They think you're being dramatic or tired or ungrateful. And I'm 35 now, a single mom raising my 9-year-old son, Ethan. He's quiet, thoughtful, a kid who watches people closely but speaks only when he's sure of his words. I work as an administrative manager at a charter school in Tempe, Arizona. My days are filled with schedules, attendance sheets, parent meetings, and more emails than anyone should ever manage. It's not glamorous, but it's stable. It keeps us fed, sheltered, steady. My parents still live in Phoenix, 30 minutes away, in the same house where the wallpaper is older than most of their neighbors' kids. My dad still equates love with rules, and my mom still thinks swallowing your feelings is the only way to maintain peace. I used to visit every Sunday, until the emotional math stopped balancing, where every conversation cost more than it gave. The subtly critical comments, the judgments masked as concerns, the constant minimization that left me drained for days. And then there's Tessa, the golden child, the one with endless do-overs, jobs lost, apartments abandoned, relationships collapsing, always rescued, always excused. When I pay her rent, I'm responsible. When she does the same for someone else, she's brave. It's strange how the same action shifts meaning depending on the person doing it. So when my parents invited me to their 45th anniversary dinner, I let myself believe it was a peace offering. My mom's text said, "Just family, nothing big." I offered to book the restaurant and chose a beautiful steakhouse in Scottsdale. Soft lighting, cushioned booths, private rooms so we could talk without shouting over strangers. I even had an old wedding photo of theirs from 1978 digitally restored and elegantly framed. I thought, for one evening, we could sit at a table and simply be a family without the usual wounds reopening. I didn't realize I was walking directly into a script they'd rehearsed all my life, the kind where affection came with limits and respect had exceptions. Ethan and I arrived 5 minutes early. He wore the little navy blazer I had ironed that morning, his hair combed carefully, the way he preferred, not too neat, not childish. His hand wrapped tightly around mine as we stepped through the heavy glass doors. The smell of grilled meat drifted through the air, jazz music hovered above quiet conversations, and silverware clinked with that soft restaurant rhythm. It was warm, polished, expensive, a place where people pretended everything was perfect even when it wasn't. Tessa and her family were already settled. Doug had a drink in hand, and their boys sprawled across the booth, loud and glowing from their screens. Tessa turned just enough to acknowledge us. "Oh, hey, you made it." She didn't bother to stand. My mom pulled me into a half-distracted hug. My dad didn't even glance up. The gift bag in my hand, holding the restored photo, sat on my side of the table like leftover clutter. I helped Ethan unfold his napkin, pointed to the menu, whispered, "You can choose whatever you want." He grinned at the chicken tenders. Simple, familiar, safe. I was about to wave down the waiter when Tessa leaned over, gently nudging the breadbasket toward Ethan. "We didn't order for your son," she said. "Mom figured he probably wouldn't eat anything here anyway." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. Then my dad added, casual as weather talk, "You should have brought him something from home." It wasn't just the words. It was how natural they sounded, how effortlessly dismissive they'd become. I looked at my mother, but she was staring into her water glass like she was searching for something at the bottom. No one moved. No one defended my kid. Ethan's shoulders curled inward. No tears, no complaint. He just stared at the bread like he wasn't sure he deserved even that. Something inside me fractured quietly, like a hairline crack in stone. I looked at the table and saw the same dynamic as always. Tessa being served first, me clearing the crumbs, and instead of exploding, I smiled. One word came out of my mouth. Noted. It hung there, heavier than the dim lighting. Tessa blinked. My dad returned to sawing at his steak. Ethan looked up at me, not scared, not confused, but aware. He understood that something had shifted. I didn't speak again. I waited. I waited for the moment I'd return the humiliation exactly where it belonged. The waiter came back with his cheerful notepad. "Are we ready to order?" he asked. The room suddenly felt too still. Ethan breathed softly beside me. My mom was scrolling through her phone. My dad pretended not to see the tension. Tessa was whispering to Doug with that smug half-smile. I pushed my chair back and stood. The scrape echoed across the entire private room. "Actually, please cancel any orders that haven't already been sent to the kitchen. And anything already prepared, put that on my father's tab. It is his anniversary celebration, after all." The waiter froze. Tessa's mouth fell open. My father finally looked up, steak knife suspended in the air. "And for my son, he'll take the ribeye, medium rare, truffle fries, and a Coke. Thank you." The waiter nodded and rushed away. Ethan glanced at me, uncertain, proud, overwhelmed. I broke a breadstick in two and handed him a piece. "Eat, sweetheart. We're okay." Doug cleared his throat. Was that necessary? I turned to him with the calm of someone who had nothing left to swallow. Yes, it was. No one else said anything. The only sound was faint jazz through the walls. At the far end of the table, Uncle Frank chuckled softly. I hadn't even noticed him and Aunt Laura slip in late, watching everything. Laura met my eyes with a small, approving nod, like she'd been waiting years for me to stop shrinking.
Dinner crawled on, stiff and awkward. Tessa's kids whined about their food. My dad stayed silent. My mom kept trying to smooth over the tension with brittle small talk. When the check came, the waiter set it directly in front of my father. His face burned red, but he didn't say a word. As we stood to leave, I reached into the gift bag and lifted out the framed wedding photo. Sepia tones, softened edges, two young people smiling like the world was theirs. I placed it on the table. "Happy anniversary," I said quietly. Then I took Ethan's hand and walked out. We passed the host stand, the bar, the jazz still playing like it was any other night. Outside, the cold air wrapped around us. Ethan squeezed my hand. "Mom," he said. "Yeah?" I answered. He looked up at me, small and serious. "You weren't scared?" I smiled. "No, baby. I was done." By the time I tucked Ethan into bed that night, my phone was already lighting up calls from Mom, missed FaceTimes from Tessa, one long voicemail from Dad. I didn't listen to any of them. I knew exactly what they'd say. "You embarrassed us. You made a scene. You ruined our dinner." For once, I didn't care. I poured a glass of water, sat on the couch, and let the quiet sink in. The house felt still, safe. No one talking over me, no one telling me what I should have done differently. Then my phone buzzed again. A message from Tessa. "You owe Dad for the dinner. $1,200. Pay your share." I stared at it for a long minute, then typed back one word. Noted. I didn't hit send. I didn't need to. The next morning, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to see my parents and Tessa standing on the porch. They didn't call first. They never did. Dad was holding an envelope. Mom's lips were pressed so tight they were almost white. Tessa had her arms crossed, her sunglasses still on, though it was cloudy. "Can we come in?" Mom asked, already stepping forward. I didn't answer. I just moved aside. Ethan was sitting on the couch, pretending to play his Switch. He looked up, caught my eyes, then looked back down. He didn't need to see this, but he'd lived through enough of it already to know how it went. Dad placed the envelope on the kitchen counter with a soft thud. "That's the bill from last night. You agreed to pay half. You didn't." I leaned against the counter, calm. "Actually, I didn't agree to that. I offered to host and you turned it into a public shaming. That was your tab." "You embarrassed the entire family," Mom said, her voice shaking. "In public, Aubrey. People were watching." Tessa cut in, sharper. "You're delusional. Everyone's talking about it. You looked crazy." I laughed quietly. Crazy. "You called my son invisible. Maybe that's what crazy looks like to people who can't handle a mirror." Tessa's mouth opened, but Uncle Frank's truck pulled up before she could speak. I'd called him 15 minutes earlier, said, "They're here." He had simply replied, "We're on our way." When he and Aunt Laura walked in, the room shifted. My mom's face dropped, Dad's eyes narrowed. Frank nodded at me. "You good?" "Perfect," I said. Laura went straight to the counter, looked at the envelope, then back at my parents. "You really came here to collect money from your daughter after what happened." "This isn't your business," Mom said quickly. Frank crossed his arms. "It is when you keep pretending one child's worth more than the other." Tessa scoffed. "Oh, please, here we go again. Poor, perfect Aubrey." I turned to her, my voice level. "You know, I've covered your rent for almost a year, paid your electric bill, bought your kids Christmas presents. You never said thank you. You just said you'd pay me back soon." Frank slid a stack of papers across the table, photocopies of payments and transfers. I hadn't told him I was saving them, but Laura had suggested I document everything months ago. Tessa went pale. "You kept records?" "I keep receipts for people who forget how much they take." Mom's hand shot up, trembling. "Enough. This is private family business." Laura cut in, her tone calm but firm. "Then start acting like a family." No one spoke. Even Ethan looked up from the couch. I reached for the envelope on the counter, opened it. Inside was the restaurant invoice, $1,200. Neat handwriting at the bottom. "Pay your share. Aubrey." I pulled $600 in cash from my wallet, placed it on top. "Here's half. Not out of guilt, out of pettiness. I sleep better knowing you didn't get the whole thing." Dad's face flushed red. "You're being disrespectful." "No," I said. "I'm being done." I slid the remaining papers from the folder toward them. Proof of every payment I'd ever made to Tessa, screenshots of messages, even a note from the school counselor confirming Ethan was doing fine after their so-called concern report. Mom's face drained of color. Dad clenched his jaw. Tessa was trembling. "You're pathetic," she said, voice cracking. "Dragging everyone down because you can't stand not being the favorite." I stepped closer. "You were always the favorite, Tessa. You just mistook it for love." The room went quiet. Frank nodded once. "That's it. We're done here." I walked to the door, opened it, and waited. It took them a few seconds, but eventually they filed out. My dad first, muttering something under his breath. My mom next, eyes wet. Tessa last, glaring. When the door closed, I locked it and leaned my forehead against the wood. For a moment, I just stood there breathing. Then my phone buzzed again, a voicemail from an unknown number. I hit play. "This is the Department of Child Services. We received an anonymous report about your son, Ethan.
We'd like to schedule a home visit. I froze. By the time the knock came 2 hours later, I'd already cleaned every surface of the house, double-checked the fridge, straightened Ethan's room. The two women at the door were professional, calm. They asked questions, they looked around, they smiled at Ethan's art taped to the fridge. One of them said quietly before leaving, "We can tell this was a misunderstanding. You'd be surprised how often family does this." I wasn't surprised. Not anymore. That night, I gathered everything. Copies of payments, messages, photos, and one letter I'd found months ago in a box in the garage. My mother's handwriting, dated 35 years back. I don't think I'll ever bond with this second child. I'm too tired to try. I scanned the last line over and over until it blurred. That letter wasn't meant for me to find, but it explained everything. The next morning, I called my lawyer, Karen, a friend of Laura's. We filed for a formal cease and desist against my parents and Tessa, citing harassment and false reporting. Karen was quick, efficient, and furious on my behalf. A week later, a letter arrived at my door, this time from their attorney. They were filing for grandparent visitation rights, claiming I was denying them access to Ethan out of spite. Karen read it, smirked, and said, "They don't have a case. Arizona law won't back them, but let's make sure they regret even trying." We filed a full response with evidence attached, proof of harassment, the CPS report marked unfounded, the payment trail, and that old letter from my mother. 3 days later, the case was dismissed. When I told Ethan, he just nodded. "So they can't bother us anymore." "No, honey," I said, "not anymore." He smiled. Small, but real. That evening, as I watched him color at the table, I realized it wasn't revenge I'd done, it was rescue. Rescue from a family that confused loyalty with obedience and love with control. After the court dismissed their claim, silence finally settled like clean air after a storm. No calls, no messages, just quiet. I changed the locks the same week and updated my will naming Uncle Frank and Aunt Laura as Ethan's legal guardians if anything ever happened to me. It felt strange, freeing, like cutting a rope that had been digging into my wrists for years. Doug, Tessa's husband, sent a single text 2 days later, a screenshot of a bank transfer. Half the rent I'd covered for them. No apology, no words, just numbers. A few minutes after, another message came through. "I'm done with her. Take care of yourself." I stared at it for a while before deleting it. He wasn't worth the space in my phone. None of them were. When I saw my mother at the grocery store a week later, she looked smaller, older. She didn't speak, just stood by the produce section, pretending to compare prices on apples. I walked right past her. For the first time in my life, I didn't stop to make her comfortable. At home, Ethan was on the porch, reading. The sunset painted his face in gold and orange. "You seem different," he said quietly. "I am," I told him. I stopped trying to fix things that weren't broken by me. He smiled, leaned against my shoulder, and kept reading. The air was still, peaceful, and for once, no one else had the power to ruin it. A few weeks later, Ethan and I drove north to Prescott, just the two of us. We set up a small camp by the lake, roasted marshmallows, and watched the fire crackle against the night. The stars looked endless, untouched by everything we'd left behind. Ethan turned to me, his voice soft. "You seem lighter, Mom." I smiled, watching the flames dance in his eyes. That's what freedom feels like. For the first time in years, I wasn't angry, I wasn't sad. I was just free. If you've ever had to draw a line with family to protect your peace, tell me, in the comments, Where are you listening from tonight? Because I know we're not alone.